Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Getting Unstuck workshop. This part will be focused on activity monitoring, and as a reminder, each of these sections will build off of the prior sections. So this being part 3 will build off of parts 1 and 2, and if you have not already listened to parts 1 and 2, we recommend going back and listening to those two first, as this section will make a lot more sense with the background of what's covered in the first two sections. So in this section, we're going to be focused on the behavioral components or behavioral symptoms of depression, or as one writer called it, how to do a good depression. So the idea of this, how to do a good depression, is if we were to have a video camera on someone who is depressed, what would we see them doing? What are the behaviors we would physically see that person doing? So first, we'll kind of start at the top and go all the way through. We'd see that person staying still, not doing anything. They'd also probably be watching excessive amounts of TV, going online for hours, viewing social media, be sleeping during the day, probably not sleeping at night, or sleeping through the day and night. They'd be focused on the past, focused on their fears, faults, and resentments, be isolating and avoiding other people, including friends and family, so they just wouldn't be seeing those people. They do talk to people, they'd be talking about the same topics, which typically would be about how depressed or how unhappy they are. The person would be eating poorly, probably overeating. Some people might stop eating. People who do eat predominantly junk food, sugar, carbs, things like that. This person is not pursuing hobbies, passions, or interests. Again, if you're staying still and not doing anything, probably not pursuing hobbies, passions, and interests. They might drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, use other drugs in an attempt to feel better, and for most people, an ultimately ill-fated attempt to feel better. And then finally, this person would not be asking for help. So again, these are a lot of the behaviors that we would see in a good depression. And at the same time, it's important to recognize that different behaviors will be different for different people who are depressed. So two people who are depressed might be doing very different things, and both can be equally depressed. Coming back to this idea of it's important to understand what depression looks like for you. So in this section, what we're going to talk about is specifically how to pay attention to the specific behaviors that are manifesting in your life as you are depressed. So another way of referring to paying attention to the behaviors that manifest for you is activity monitoring, or specifically attending to how you're spending your time, what you're actually doing. For this slide, it'll be helpful to refer to the document associated with this module, which is the activity monitoring worksheet. That worksheet, you'll see, has spaces for different hours throughout the day, and a spot to write down what it is that you're doing, then to rate each of those activities that you are doing in terms of the enjoyment on a 0 to 10 scale, importance of that behavior on a 0 to 10 scale, and then your overall mood for the day, again on a 0 to 10 scale. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what those different scales mean and how to kind of do all of that with activity monitoring. But before I do that, just want to talk about kind of the purpose of activity monitoring, why we do this, why it's important to really pay close attention to how you're spending your time. So as we talked about in the previous slide with how to do a good depression and a lot of the behaviors that are common in depression, this can manifest in a variety of different ways that will be different for different people. And by really paying attention to what you're doing, you get a sense of what am I doing with my life and what am I not doing with my life. As we've talked about before, depression typically manifests in withdrawal, so people just not doing things that are usually important to them. And while it may seem obvious that like I'm not doing X, Y, or Z, that really can be hard to notice. And so by taking the time to like fill out these forms and really attend to the activities you are doing and not doing, can give you a clearer sense of what's actually missing from my life that used to be there and what's been added that didn't used to be there that maybe I don't want to be there anymore. The ratings can help to clarify which of those categories the different behaviors might fall under in terms of things that I am still doing that are important to me and that I do enjoy, things that I'm not doing that I probably would enjoy, and things I'm doing that I don't enjoy and aren't important to me and can make you question a little bit of like, what else could I do in place of those things, as well as how all those connect back to your mood. So then coming back to these rating scales, enjoyment is pretty self-explanatory. So enjoyment is basically, if you were to write down a behavior in which you would engage during the day, think about how much did I enjoy that, with 0 being I did not enjoy it at all, and a 10 being it was the most enjoyable thing I did all day, all week. Then importance means how important is this activity to me? Does this activity give me a sense of accomplishment? Does it give me any sort of satisfaction that isn't just enjoyment, that's more, I'm glad I did this because it's important for me to do this? There can be overlap between enjoyment and importance, and there will be some things that are high on enjoyment, low on importance, some things that are high on importance, low on enjoyment, some that will be high on both, and some that will be low on both. So some activities that won't be enjoyable or important. And so again, that 0 to 10 scale with importance, 0 is not important at all, 10 is most important to me. Then the relationship to mood, so rating your overall mood for the day. In this case, we're just looking at a 0 mood being about as sad and hopeless and depressed as you can imagine being, and a 10 being the happiest, most excited, most wonderful day you can imagine. Now we'll just look at some more specific examples of different behaviors and those rating scales to give you a better idea of kind of how those rating scales work, as well as the overall mood for the day. So obviously with this, we've just taken a small cross-section of a person's day. We didn't go through the whole thing. And so mood for the day is more like an estimate based on these activities. Yours will likely have a lot more input based into that overall mood. So first, let's start with lunch with a friend. So this behavior is probably pretty enjoyable. So we have an 8 out of 10. Had fun having lunch with a friend. And it's also important because maybe you value friendships, maybe you value food, maybe you value both of those things. And so it's important to you to have lunch with friends. It's important to stay connected and important to go out and to eat, things like that. Then brushing your teeth is an example of behavior that probably not all that enjoyable, and at the same time can be really important because maybe you value dental hygiene or just hygiene generally. And so keeping up with something like brushing your teeth and making sure you do that twice a day could be something that's really important to you, even though you don't enjoy it. Next, we have watching TV. Can be enjoyable and maybe not all that important at the same time. In this case, we have enjoyment rated as a 7, maybe it was a show you particularly like, and importance rated at a 3. And notice it's a 3, not a 0, because it might still be important to you to have leisure time, to have time where you're not studying and doing other things. And yeah, that's great to be able to balance things. And at the same time, maybe watching TV isn't as important to you as something else like connecting with a friend or eating or something like that. Then lastly, we have an example that's low on both rating scales. So mindlessly scrolling through social media. While maybe there's some enjoyment that comes from this, chances are it's not a lot. And also might not be all that important. Important in the sense of like, if you were to look back and say like, how do I want to be spending my time? Perhaps going through social media wouldn't be the first thing that comes to mind. And then the overall mood for the day, just based on these experiences, we had a couple of experiences that were enjoyable, a couple of experiences that were important, and then some not so important, some not so enjoyable. So kind of came out somewhere in the middle, about a 5 out of 10 in the overall mood for the day. So again, the idea behind activity monitoring is to really pay attention to what am I doing, what does my life look like right now while I'm depressed, to give me a better sense of what have I maybe lost, what am I doing, what might I want to be doing that could be different. So I encourage you to utilize the blank activity monitoring worksheet to make note of the different behaviors that you notice, the different activities that you notice over the course of the next week. So you can use a full week before coming back and viewing the 4th module of this workshop. You can also do it for a couple of days. That part is up to you. It is important to note, though, that while the next couple sections we're going to talk more about the different behaviors you might want to increase and different behaviors you might want to cut out. Those sections are going to be more specifically helpful to you if you have a better understanding of what your behavior, what your activities look like. That'll just help you to tailor it more to your own experience as opposed to just like a general idea, which is what this workshop can give you. And that concludes section 3 on activity monitoring.